South Tyrone.
Conor Murphy, you've called it narrow sectarianism, but it's very sensible politics, isn't it?
Well, I don't think it's in our best interests. I think either Tom's party stood on the same platform last Westminster election with the Conservative Party, with David Cameron, and we have reaped the benefit of their government ever since, where we've had £1.5 billion worth of cuts to our budget. We've had to set aside further money, which will take that up over to £2 billion to try and protect the vulnerable from the impact of the welfare reform.
But it didn't do the Ulster Unionists or UConn for much good, did it?
Well, I mean, they shared that platform. They wanted to be part of that government. The clear sense from both Unionist parties, I think, is if they can play a part in returning a Conservative government, that's what they will do. And I think that would be very, very bad for people. I also think for progressive politics here, I think there is an alternative to that outlook, that Unionist outlook, that Tory outlook. And I think advocated that progressive parties on the other side of that should try to ensure...
So you're not opposed to pacts, just the Unionist pact?
No, well...
Because you want the SDLP to go into a pact with you.
And the SDLP in the last election, in the European election, asked us, or called on us to call for our voters to give SDLP candidates their second preference on the basis that 2 nationalist seats were possible. So they're quite interested in pacts when it suits them. But in relation to the Unionist parties, I don't think it would be good for the North to have parties from here going over, shoring up a Conservative government, which has already signalled its intent to deepen and hasten the cuts that have been devastating our public services.
Columnist, would it not make sense for you to get into... If you took your seats at Westminster, you could support a Labour government, get rid of all the welfare reforms, perhaps.
Well, I don't think the Labour government, if they come in, are intent on doing that. But can I just say that the question is very interesting. An equally interesting question is why there's no Unionist pact in South Belfast, South Down or Foyle. And the reality is that the SDLP are silent beneficiaries of this deal within unionism. But we are elected on a mandate not to take our seats. Our 5 seats that we hold have been returned and returned again. In the last election, Sinn Féin secured the most votes in the Westminster election right across the north, all 18 constituencies. Yep. So we have a very strong one. Sorry, Colin, I didn't interrupt you.
You'll have a chance to.
I didn't interrupt you. As I said, the 3 seats that the SDLP hold, interestingly, haven't seen a Unionist pact candidate. And the reality is that the SDLP did ask us. They did ask us for Martina Anderson's number 2 votes in the last European election, and they were interested in the pact in that time, but not so today.
Well, that's proportional representation. That's different.
Well, so they asked us. Sorry,
you don't have pacts in proportional representation.
The SDLP asked us on the basis that 2 nationalist MEP seats were possible. Okay. Now they're opposed to nationalist pacts now, so I mean you can't have it both ways.
Colin.
Conor talks about all these
OTR letters, of course. The Northern Ireland Committee at Westminster has found that the OTR scheme, involving, 228 people in total, was a one-sided and secretive arrangement which has damaged the integrity of the criminal justice system. Conor Murphy, no one knew, says this report, except you and the Northern Ireland office. That was just the way you wanted it.
Well, any number of things I could take issue with there. Firstly, the integrity of the criminal justice system, the system that gave us internment, that give us diplock courts, that give us shoot to kill, that give us the Guildford 4 and the Birmingham 6 and the Widgery report into Bloody Sunday. You know, the other thing that this is important to note about this report, this is a political report. There's already been a judicial report into this which completely contradicts the finding of that report, which says on 29 pages of evidence how much people knew about this, and says that the system itself was within the law. Now, clearly the people who drafted this report have to cover for the fact that they weren't asking questions in Parliament in relation to it, and so they claim it was secretive. And the other thing about it being one-sided was there are no state forces people on the run. There are no loyalists that I know of that are on the run. And so very clearly in circumstances where the vast majority of these people, there was no evidence, there was no warrant out for their arrest, there was nothing against them. It was clear that this was an anomaly which followed on from the arrangement, the Good Friday Agreement arrangement in relation to prisoners, which was negotiated out of Weston Park, supported by both governments and the parties to that negotiation, and was clearly an anomaly that had to be dealt with under the terms of the peace process.
Jeffrey Donaldson, Conor Murphy is right. The Northern Ireland Committee report is quite different from the Hallett report. Conor Murphy, Sinn Féin have said they will use a petition of concern to block this bill. But I read in the paper tonight that what might seem to be a very simple solution, that you could have a disclaimer. You could write the invoice for this and say, compliance with the law does not constitute approval of the activities in question. Would that be a sensible compromise?
Well, I think, you see, I accept what Jeffrey says in terms of his own faith and his opposition to homophobia, but the reality is that there is homophobia at senior level in politics here, and has been expressed many times, and that means that we need to be vigilant in terms of protecting people's rights. And we have issued a petition of concern. We have the required 30 signatures, so I can assure you that the Conscience Clause bill will not be going through as it's being proposed in the Assembly. I think that we need to remain vigilant. The equality legislation protected people for a reason, and that was because people experienced inequality in terms of their sexual orientation, and that's why they were specified as a group. And that, as I say, that homophobia continues in society, and I think we do need to be very careful to make sure that we do not undermine that. One way of dealing, and there are at times competing rights in terms of people's approach to life, and one way of dealing with that, and it's still an outstanding issue from the Good Friday Agreement, is to have a Bill of Rights. And let's protect all of the categories that are protected in the equality legislation, and let's ensure that we have a sensible approach to all of this. And the Equality Commission has a responsibility to help us steer a way through where there is a contest around rights. But I think in terms of protection for the gay community and all of the other categories under the Section 75 of equality legislation, we have to remain vigilant because those discriminations still exist in our society.
Change the record.
Well,
change the rhetoric.
I think the Stormont is dealing with two, and we've said this in the run-up over the last number of years in the run-up to the Stormont Rights Agreement, we're dealing with two sets of difficult pressures. One is the political pressures, the legacy issues. And bear in mind, we've had a conflict going on 800 years, if you want to go back that far, and we're trying to deal with the legacy issues that arise from that and the division that there is in our society. And those are difficult issues to deal with. I'm not saying we always get it right, quite often we get it wrong. And the other issue, which this gentleman alluded to, is the financial pressure. The Stormont Assembly has had 1.5 billion taken off the block grant in the last 3 years. The prospect going into the next government, if it is the Tories that are returned, is deeper and harder and faster cuts. And that is piling enormous pressure on our ability to provide public services to try and protect the most vulnerable in society. And that makes it very difficult and touchy decision making. And you know, Naomi talks about a squabbling. The Alliance squabbled as good as the rest of us around the Stormont House talks, and that's their role. And that makes for a very difficult relationship in the parties themselves. So we are dealing with very difficult issues. There is an attempt to try and get the best deal possible, and there is an agreement. None of the parties' programme for government was about austerity, was about cuts in public services, was about a welfare reform which was cutting the most vulnerable in society. And we're trying to protect that by spreading as best we possibly can and reaching agreement in relation to the scarce resources we have. And that is a difficult task to do.
It leads us, Conor.
I think I just think that we are entitled to be held to scrutiny in doing that. I accept that absolutely and completely, but we're also entitled to some understanding of the issues.
It leads us very nicely into our next question from Michael Palmer, who's running to its close. Conor Murphy, I mean, do you think that Northern Ireland MPs should even be thinking about it?
I don't think there's any benefit. I know the SDLP aspire to be part of a Labour government, part of the British government.
Sister party. Well, why wouldn't they? And always have been.
Well, I mean, they differ substantially from a lot of Labour policies, but I don't see, and I certainly don't see the benefit to the people here of shoring up another Tory government. The reality is, I mean, Jeffrey argues about what they might get in return for it, but Nigel Dodd set out the manifesto, if you like, and that involved extra defence spending, border security, things like that. I don't see those as being of benefit to us. I think as an Irish Republican who's elected on a mandate, along with my colleagues, not to take our seats in Westminster, I think the politics of Ireland should be practised on the island of Ireland, and we are better placed to resolve our own difficulties. We have enough wit to resolve our own difficulties with all the difficulties we have than to be part of a system in terms of the British government and trying to involve ourselves in decision making on behalf of the British people.
Colin, would you just love to be in?
5 political parties represented on the panel tonight. 4 of them have representations at Westminster, but one of them managed to wrangle more money out of the government. You know, it was Sinn Féin. You know, Jeffrey was going on about the best deal.
That's just
the
an
DUP went on
interpretation.
about
I
the
couldn't
best deal
possibly
for
let you get away with that.
The only department
they were all at it.
The only department that brought forward spending plans for more money was a Sinn Féin
Lady in the
department.
white cardigan.
I actually think the Unionist Parties